This unit is called What is EQ? We all know these channel strip blocks that say EQ, and we can insert an equalizer into a channel strip. There's a wide range of them, but what is actually EQ for? Okay, let's find out. Sound, like light, has a spectrum. The spectrum of light that the human eye can see ranges from red through orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo to violet. There are kinds of light outside of that spectrum that we can't see, like infrared and ultraviolet, but we can see between red and violet. Sound also has a spectrum, and the spectrum of sound ranges from a very deep bassy sound, 20 cycles per second or 20 hertz, up to a very high trebly sound of 20,000 cycles per second or 20 kilohertz. And if I gradually sweep this oscillator up through the frequencies, watch the frequency number here. 20 hertz is really too low for most people to hear. Once we get up to about 80, you start to hear it, and on a bigger, decent set of speakers, you'd hear down to about 30 or 40. I'm going up through the frequency range, and it's getting higher and higher. When I get up towards 15, 16, up to 20 hertz, it becomes harder and harder to hear, but it is there. So down at the bottom here is bass, then the rest of this is middle, and up at the top is treble. Let's see that in action. I've got a file, an audio file on this track, and it's in Polish.
Panie I panowie, witam Państwa serdecznie na pokładzie naszej...
The reason it's in Polish is that I don't want you to listen to the words, I want you to listen to the sound. And I'm going to put an EQ on. If I go to the Inserts button and I select EQ, Channel EQ, a window comes up, and the first thing we see is something that corresponds to what we just talked about. From 20 hertz up through to 20 kilohertz, we've got the whole range of tones. Let's see what happens if I start messing around with the EQ. What happens if I start removing the bass frequencies?
Panie I panowie, witam Państwa serdecznie na pokładzie naszej firmy zajmującej się ochroną przeciwpożarową. Zaraz wystartujemy. Nie do znanych miast ani obcych kultur, lecz z naukowym
Can you hear how that's become really tinny?
Podczas gdy Państwo wygodnie zasiądą w fotelach i będą rozkoszować się lutem, będziemy stale dopasowywać zawartość tlenu w kabinie do symulowanej wysokości
What happens
lotu.
if I start removing the high
Nasz
frequencies?
eksperyment, tyle możemy już Państwu zdradzić, będzie mianowicie związany z pytaniem, co stanie się, gdy zawartość
It's become very muffled.
zostanie zmniejszona o kilka procent.
Okay.
Warunek brzmiał, tutaj już nigdy nie może wybuchnąć pożar. Nawet nie potrafię oszacować, jaką wartość, także kulturalną, mają te przedmioty.
What happens if I start looking at the bits between the very high and the very low frequencies and maybe try amplifying some of those frequencies?
Utrzymujemy się z tego, że bezpiecznie administrujemy danymi i je przechowujemy. Przechowujemy w magazynie kilkaset, czasem 1000 ton masła. W razie pożaru wszystko uległoby zniszczeniu. Prewencyjny system przeciwpożarowy ma większą wartość niż ten, który reaguje, gdy doszło już do wybuchu pożaru.
I can also cut
Ogień
those
często wyrządza
frequencies.
ogromne szkody. W halach produkcyjnych i magazynach, w działach informatycznych i urządzeniach telekomunikacyjnych, w pomieszczeniach biurowych oraz budynkach, w których przechowywane są dobra kultury. W razie pożaru można na zawsze utracić przedmioty i wartości, których nie da się...
It's quite similar to putting a filter over a camera lens. So I can choose first of all a frequency that I'm going to cut or boost. I can then choose how much I cut or boost it by. And I can choose the width of frequencies to either side of that central frequency that I cut or boost. So I can really tailor the sound very, very deeply. Let's say, for example, a classic example for me is if there's a bass note that's really ringing out. Let's say every time the bass guitarist plays a note of A, it sounds twice as loud as the rest. I know that a note of A is either 440 hertz or 220 hertz. So if I cut around 220 hertz, I will be able to make that note of A sound equal in volume to the other notes around it. In other words, I have equalized it. That's basically what equalization is. It allows you to tailor the sound in terms of its tone. And if we go and switch this to an analyzer and then play,
Zastąpić.
you can see
Dotychczas celem urządzeń
most
zwalczających
of there's a
pożary
lot of
było jak
energy in the
najszybsze ich
bottom end
ugaszenie.
around here, this sort of
Firma Wagner
100 to
idzie
200.
jednak o krok dalej. Dzięki systemowi
And not much in the
oksydakt
high end.
nie może dojść do powstania
So I might
pożaru.
want to brighten this
Jak
a little.
działa ten system? Każdy proces
There we go.
spalania
I've evened it
potrzebuje
out
tlenu.
and maybe cut off some of the
Powietrze,
bottom
którym
end.
oddychamy, składa się w około 21% z tlenu, w 79% z azotu i gazów szlachetnych. Poprzez zmianę tych proporcji i zastąpienie
There,
części
I've
tlenu
flattened it
azotem
out to some
można
degree.
pozbawić ogień energii.
Okay, that's a basic description of what EQ does. In the more advanced tutorials, we'll look at how to use it in a musical environment.